This is Talkin' Mule Deer with your hosts Steve Belinda and Jody Stemler. Talkin' Mule Deer takes you on a journey to learn more about the Mule Deer Foundation, mule deer and black-tailed deer biology and management, tips and tactics for hunting, conservation issues, and even features some of our corporate and celebrity partners. Now, let's start talking mule deer.
Hey, welcome back to Talkin' Mule Deer. I'm Steve Belinda, your host, and today we're going to be talking Wyoming. We have with us, of course, our very own Shawn Blajszczak from POW, and one of his neighbors, and someone that many of you may know, it's Ike Eastman, from the president and CEO of Eastman Publishing. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me on.
So how's the weather been this year, guys? You made it down.
Oh, we've had an amazing winter, actually. A couple Saturdays ago, it was 72 degrees in my house, which it should be like 10 below by now. And then it started snowing, of course, last Monday, and we've had some snow, but we haven't had the real cold winter, which is good. As you know, deer can handle, they can either handle cold or they can handle snow, but they can't handle both.
Well, we got the 50 inches out of that storm, and we're, just an hour away, and then it's been blowing, so our winter ranges are probably in a little bit different shape in southern Montana. So the Eastman family, for many of you who may be listening, you should know that. I tell you what, one of my early interests in mule deer was because of what the Eastmans were doing out on winter range. We were talking yesterday about, with one of your employees, a former MDF staffer.
Oh, Brandon.
Yeah, about Extreme Bucks 1 through 4 and the Raculator. I still have my Raculator on my bookshelf. And you know what's funny about that, Ike?
I had completely forgot that thing even existed.
So we went out. Well, when that first came out, I actually bought the package for my father, who was living in Pennsylvania at the time. And, so a bunch of us are like, this thing's, hokey. And so we got some deer and we scored them. And then we, went and scored them with the Raculator. And it was very, very accurate. We couldn't believe how accurate that thing was. And for the uninitiated here, the Raculator was a Chinese spin wheel where you lined up stuff, and then at the end of the day, after you lined everything up, you looked to the right, and it told you the range of what the deer was going to be in. So.
It's just all it is what do they call them? Is it a paper computer?
Yeah.
Or something like that. We use it as pilots. That's how you calculate fuel and all that stuff. It's the same. It was the same concept. Because my grandfather was a pilot. Yeah. So he'd been using that and went, I could do this for deer.
And Sean's looking at us like, what the heck?
I just really like the name they gave it.
The Raculator?
That's sort of the best name I could think of.
So your grandfather was Gordon?
Yes.
Yep. And so tell us a little bit about how you guys got interested in, you're from Wyoming, but not originally, when most people think Eastmans, we think in mule deer and Wyoming.
Yeah. Well, so I'll give you the 30,000 quick thing. My grandfather, 1957, Gordon Eastman they were living in Omak, Washington, and he mortgaged the house and bought a camera and went to Alaska and started filming wildlife. Nobody was doing it back then, and he was a really true adventurer. I mean, he was a real adventurer. And he started filming wildlife and then ended up in Jackson filming actually elk on the winter range in the elk refuge in Jackson, and came home and told my grandmother, we're moving to Jackson. Yeah. So my dad, when he was little, moved to Jackson. Now, my mom's side of the family has been in Wyoming for 5 generations. I mean, they've been there for a long time. So the wildlife, obviously, in our family has been a very important thing for a long, long time, for generations, great-grandfathers, all this stuff. So they moved to Wyoming in the mule deer, what they called the mule deer heyday. Yeah. I mean, you go to the winter range in Pinedale, and there was literally millions of deer in Wyoming. Yeah. And there would be hundreds of thousands of deer. It was like ants out there. Obviously sparked an interest in my father, who took photos, filmed, and hung out in the program that we watched last night. He says this best. He goes, I think people should see and hang out with animals all year round. You better understand them. I mean, hunting them is one thing, but if you understand their habits in the winter or habits in the spring, you understand them way better, and you'll be a more successul hunter.
Yeah, I often say, think like the deer, not like the human hunting the deer.
Yep, exactly. So that's kind of an overview. Obviously, we own I own 2 magazines and a whole digital platform, a television show on the Outdoor Channel, and it's basically bringing our adventures to the common guy. And one thing that we fight for is the conservation of wildlife, but it's also the conservation of our way of life as a hunter, and it's for the common hunter. I'm not into, the high-end guys that are hunting high fences and these huge hunts. It's more about the common applicant for hunting licenses, and that's what we fight for.
And so in Wyoming, I mean, you got 48% of the state that's public.
Yep.
And, that western half of the state where a lot of the sagebrush and mule deer habitat and even some of our that's public. And so, it's a tremendous state to just go out and roam. Yep. If you draw the tag, you've got basically a ton of places to go hunt. I mean, that's one of the things that I grew up in Pennsylvania and came out west because my dad used to come out hunting, and I've got a little anecdote for you here that so he but I just fell in love with it. And so, it's I consider Southern Wyoming, a small town Southern Wyoming, my adopted home because, it's one of those places I moved to during college, moved right there after college, and got married there, met my wife's from Rollins. And,
I'm sorry.
So it's they have a family ranch that's been in the family since before statehood outside of Gillette. So it's really it's as much home to me as a foreigner in Wyoming as it is anywhere else. And but so when my father used to come out hunting, and they would go south of Jackson, and they would hunt mule deer and elk, and he had a handful of friends from Pennsylvania that would try to draw tags every year, and they apparently somewhere along, someone in your family was looking to maybe sell them one of their permits. And they went through it. And so a couple years ago, my mother asked me to look through some of the paperwork. This is 10 years after my father died. And just to see if it was, something we should throw out or not. And really what it was back and forth between this group of hunters and someone, I don't remember who in your family, about purchasing one of the outfitting licenses and that.
So we had, in our family, we've had 3 outfitting. My dad had one, my Uncle Rod had one, and my Uncle Brad had one. Yeah. So what time of frame was this?
This was in the early 70s.
So it could have been my dad's.
Yeah, so it was, I'm going to find that and send you a copy of it, but it was, Hoback Village when they were, that's still for sale, by the way, there in Bondurant. But it was and it was just this, and they ended up, the deal ended up not happening. Yeah. But we have the correspondence back and forth with the, negotiation and all that other stuff. I was like, this is really cool.
That is cool.
I just think how my life would have changed. So at the same time, my father had a chance to purchase one of the pharmacies. He was a pharmacist in Jackson.
Okay.
So we did the whole family thing, and they looked at it, and we spent a month in the summertime doing.
You could have owned Jackson Drug.
Yeah, that's the one they were offering to sell him. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And so he didn't do it for a lot of reasons. Being from Pennsylvania, I had 5 brothers, so 6 boys, large family. Moving my mom. That she's. It's really foreign. It's a different world.
Oh, yeah.
And it's funny because, when we knew about this, it was always like a family lure, but we would say, why did you turn it down? He goes, well, we never thought anything was going to be a Jackson. And he never came back.
When we were growing up in Jackson, it was a small town. There was, 3,500 people lived there. And it was a playground for us. It was an awesome place. Now the billionaires have pushed out the millionaires, and I don't even like going back there anymore. But
so since that didn't happen, he hadn't been back. So I had lived in Wyoming he had been back to Southern Wyoming to visit me and do the things, but he had never gone back to Jackson. And so we moved to Pinedale, had a child. We're freshly married, and they came out. My dad came out, and we wanted to go into the park because he had been 30 years since he had been in the park. So we stopped in Jackson for the day, and he walked around the square, and then he stood in front of Jackson Drug, and it was just like. I was like, and he just looked and he said, you can't live in the past.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
I'll bet there was some. Dang, I should have done that. But
yeah, we all have that.
Oh, yeah.
So it's one of those things. But speaking of that, you grew up in Wyoming. Your family you've seen a lot of changes.
Oh man.
What are the biggest changes you're seeing? We were talking offline about winter range issues and that. What in your opinion or in your knowledge base, what do you think are the biggest issues we're facing in Wyoming? What have we done good? What do we got to do to the future to maintain our deer herds and our other wildlife and our hunting access?
So I'm gonna get on my soapbox, and I apologize to you and the audience because I get passionate about this. Brandon, the guy that used to be with Mule Deer Foundation, he says this all the time. He said it's not one thing that affects management of wildlife, especially mule deer. There's not one secret sauce. It's a combined like 5 or 6 things that affect them. But one of them, obviously winters. Winters is hard, but we can't control that.
Right.
What we can control is winter range, habitat. We can help habitat. One of the biggest problems that I see with mule deer is the urban sprawl. If you go to the Red Desert right now, back when I was a kid, it would take you hours to go 10 miles. There were 2-track roads, rocky roads. You couldn't go more than 5 miles an hour. Now, they're gravel roads. You can drive 60 miles an hour on those things. So
yeah, that cut down from Jeffrey City down to the interstate, man. You can do that in less than an hour.
Yeah. And so urban sprawl. The good thing is we have the knowledge now to through this mule deer migration initiative. They've collared these mule deer, and they found out that it's not, mule deer don't migrate like water. They don't just come out of the hills everywhere. There's pinch points. And if we can help control those pinch points, those corridors is what they're calling them, and we can help those deer alleviate some of the barriers for those corridors, which is easy. This is simple stuff. It's highway crossings. It's top rails on fences. It's, that Fremont, there's a, and I can't remember the guy's name, but
Luke Lynch.
Luke Lynch. Yeah, the Luke Lynch, where they bought 340 acres that was going to be a housing development. I don't know how many houses would be in that, 500 or some silly thing. And they bought that and then donated it to Game and Fish to manage. That is a giant pinch point. There's 5,000 head of deer migrate through that thing. That would have stopped. And deer are fickle. In my opinion, you know better because I'm not a biologist, but in my opinion, deer are so fickle that if you'd have done that, it would have taken 2 generations for that 5,000 to have readjusted their migration if they could have survived the winter.
Well, and that one, with the elk fence that was put up back in the 50s to keep deer out of the haystacks and out of town, they had to go move that fence too, and it was a great cooperative effort. Losing Luke was a huge loss.
Yep.
When he perished in a skiing accident a couple of years ago. But, I know of a couple other, not from the radio collar data, but from living over there and going out and observing things. And
well, that highway crossing, I think they call it the Antelope Crossing or something like that.
Trappers Point.
Yeah. That's huge.
Yeah. There's a couple down along the Boulder River and some other. There's a rock out there. We were actually out on a sponsored field tour of, we're going to show you. And I said, "Did you take them up to the rock?" And the bio just looked at me and said, "How do you know about that?" It's about 5 minutes from my house on an ATV. I used to come up here in the fall and spring and sit on the rock and have a beer and watch every animal that came through here walk at the edge of the rock. They could go other, but they didn't.
It's like a beacon.
Yeah.
It's like a lighthouse for them.
So, Shawn, we talked about this, and you and I work on this. And you may not know this, but we just secured in the last year almost $1 million for habitat work to be applied into these priority areas from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation.
That's awesome.
So, Shawn, tell us a little bit about how that's going to work.
Your Pitton and Robbins money at work.
Yeah, and this is actually from a NIFWF grant, or the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And so a lot of it will be fence work and habitat work. I think there's over 50 miles of fence that are going to be removed or modified.
Nice.
So it's wildlife friendly. We always try to get those kind of monies, especially in those, like he was saying, those bottleneck areas, the high use areas, the stopovers in those corridors. And luckily, folks in Wyoming really care. I mean, you can look at our legislature. They're looking at stuff. And make sure you voice your opinion, of course. It's not always good and always, but we had an executive order come out on migration corridors. So Wyoming is looking at this issue and trying to work the right way, but we need members to support Mule Deer Foundation and other organizations so we can get more money on the ground to improve these things.
Well, I get that question a lot, especially since we've been doing this project. People going, okay, I understand. How do I get involved?
Yeah.
I don't have a ton of money. I said, it doesn't take a ton of money. It's you know how you fill a bucket of water? One drop at a time. And so, donate when you can, and if you don't have a ton of money, use your, you got time off. Help with the fence project. Help with, whatever. I'm sure volunteers is one of your guys' struggles.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
I mean, that's Shawn's world, but, just getting involved, that message of doing what you can do, phone calls, showing up, donations, caring about the resource that we all love.
And showing up, we had a thing in Wyoming recently that was in the ballot. There's a bunch of Wyoming wildlife things in the House and the Senate right now, and showing up and telling your representatives, dude, I'm a hunter and I don't agree with this, or I will wholeheartedly agree with this, and that's huge. And in Wyoming, we live in such a cool place that our vote really does matter because we're so small. I mean, do you know how you win a primary in Wyoming? Do you know how many votes that takes?
Yeah.
Less than 1,000. Is that crazy? Yeah. You couldn't win a primary in high school at a high school prom for 1,000.
Yeah, and the nice thing about Wyoming is everyone cares about our hunting heritage. We just got to step up and do things and put our money where it needs to be, put our efforts where they need to be, volunteer, talk with your local representatives. Just make sure you're staying involved. And
informed.
Us, Eastmans, a lot of other places put out good information for you to become informed on all these issues. Just make sure you stay informed and keep in touch and volunteer. Do what you can to help the resource.
Yep.
So, Ike, back to what's the most famous Eastman mule deer? I think I have my opinion which one it was. What's the most famous one out there that was a named deer in either extreme buck?
So you're gonna say Popeye, and I'm gonna say Morty.
Morty?
I would say Morty.
What about Goliath?
I think Goliath. Okay, here's my opinion. Goliath was he's an amazing deer, but he was shot by a hunter.
Yeah.
In my opinion, as a hunter, I want to know the other stories. I want to know that those huge deer like Popeye never got took. Yeah. Because it gives me hope. The Goliath was shot, obviously, by a Utah guy, actually. And
so we used to. So when
before we jump, do you know how Morty died? Nobody knows this. We were because of this project. We were talking around the table at family dinner, and we were talking about this. Morty was killed by a truck, oil-filled truck, whacked him in the winter.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, so when I was over in Pinedale working on that oil and gas issue in the Winter Range, we would argue all the time. I'd say, listen, we need the resources of this country across the board, but there are places that are too special to drill. And, where you get into conflict, let's do things a little differently. And then, you get the infrastructure thrown down, you get roads put in. I mean, I came up on 21 pronghorn antelope. You may have seen that picture before. Yeah. That was the next morning. Everyone thought we staged that and everything else. And it's like, I was going out to look at some sage grouse, and they were in the middle of the road. And they stayed there for like 3 weeks. No one came and picked them up. It was crazy. Jeez. The eagles flew in, the ravens. It was just like, we finally went out and we're like, what?
Let's move this. Yeah. I don't want to see it
anymore. But the deer
anymore.
thing, it was like, so, and some of the companies wanted to do the right thing. And we made things like no dogs in the trucks. Because canids and cervids have evolved to one was prey, one was predator. There's a flight instinct in a deer, regardless of the size of the dog that it sees.
Oh, yeah.
And so your dog may be the best dog in the world or a little yippy dog. That deer doesn't know that. It knows.
And it causes stress.
That's right. It causes stress as it burns energy. And let's face it, deer die usually based on 1 or 2 days in the spring.
Yep.
So before green up. And so we would do, and people were like, oh, my dog, no guns in trucks.
Yeah.
Why? Because poaching is a crime of opportunity. When you're out on the Pinedale Winter Ranges and the Big Piney Winter Ranges and you see a Goliath or you see a Morty or you see a Popeye, there's a lot of people that instinctive urge that I have to reduce that animal to possession no matter what. They get the fever.
Yeah.
If you don't have a firearm in the vehicle, you're not going to do it.
Right, exactly.
And so, we started doing those things, and then, we started getting pushed back. So one of the interesting things when we started working with the energy companies about limiting the impact because they were out in the Winter Range drilling.
Right.
Guess who came to us and said, wait a minute here, I'm Joe Q Public. I've not been allowed out there forever.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden you're allowing infrastructure to get popped up. And they're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So what we said is, okay, here's the difference. Those folks are getting permitted. They're going through a process. They're actually paying.
Being vetted.
I wouldn't say being vetted, but we have made choice as society that energy development is going to happen. And so they actually go through, and it's a quite lengthy process. It can be an administrative burden. It costs the companies a lot of money. So you build that stuff in. The public isn't going through that. So you know what? When they're out there, we did things like, okay, sort of like a parking permit. Put a sticker on the window. If you're out there, you don't got a sticker, you shouldn't be out there. Get out.
Right.
we're trying to eliminate as much impact and disturbance to these deer. We put up a toll booth, and oh god, man, you should.
Oh, I'll bet that was awesome.
Oh, and then here's the other thing.
Oh my gosh, I would not want to man that.
Oh, it was 24/7 too. You had to stop in, check in when you were going in and out, and someone would open the gate. And they did it for a couple years, and it actually reduced.
Yeah.
But the calls everyone knew I was doing. The calls I was getting. The other thing we did is we said, you know what, one in and out.
Yeah.
No, you're not going to go. People would call me and say, well, I can't go have lunch with my wife because it takes me too long to drive the loop back around. I said, not my problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm looking out for the deer.
Yep.
And we did, and it worked, but then it wasn't sustainable. And of course, the quest for energy and everything else, sort of, we forget about that. But we lost half our deer herd over there on one of what I think was one of the most important winter ranges. And the reason I think that was directly back to what you guys did with your filming. In that, everyone knew where the mesa was. Everyone knew everything else. And I was just like, how can we be doing this? And, I was one voice. It was my opinion as a hunter, as a biologist. But, I did everything I could. And when I found out, I didn't have people standing up with me.
Yeah.
And that's what you're saying. Stand up with the folks that are advocating and the professionals that are tasked to take care of our wildlife.
Exactly.
And I know we keep mentioning this film, but could you tell our listeners what this film was and what it's about so they know what we're talking about?
So one of the things that we got a lot of pushback when we were filming these deer and making the Popeyes and the Goliaths and the Mortys popular, one of the pushbacks is you're making these deer popular, everybody wants to go see them. And that was an unintended consequences. What we really were trying to do is inform people that this winter range is so important. Don't mess with the winter range. Listen to the biologists, the guys that have the boots on the ground and the knowledge that those toll booths are important. That impact, is going to affect and cut our deer in half again. And so what we did is we took this year, the Migration Initiative, they collared a bunch of deer for 4 years, and they tracked every couple hours. They'd get a pin on a GPS, and they tracked where these deer were migrating to. And they actually have a doe that migrated 242
from
miles.
Island Park down to the interstate. Yeah.
Which I don't know why you would.
Island
Park is a horrible place to summer.
Here's what I asked Matt Kaufman. I said, Matt, why do deer walk through perfectly good winter range with thousands of other deer staying on that range to get to suboptimal range?
Yeah.
100 miles south. And the answer is because that's what they were trained to do.
Exactly, because that's what their mom trained them to do. But anyway, so we took that information. Of course, my dad spent a lifetime, over 60 years, studying mule deer, and that was his thing, and the winter range, summer range, everything. And so we took his knowledge with Matt Kaufman's information, and we have one of the only video libraries of footage of those deer from the 80s until now. And so we took this and combined it into a public service announcement, basically, to get involved. It doesn't have to be $1,000. It could be $5 and your time to get involved, so that this migration corridors maintain or get better. In some cases, get better, like you were talking about fencings and all this stuff. Get better so that critical habitat in the winter and gets better. Not only because that's one thing we can affect. That's what we can do. I can't change the weather. I can't change winters. That's something I can't do. I can't change the habitat in the mountains if it greens up early or it doesn't have enough rain or fires. But we can affect the winter range when those deer are so critical.
Yeah.
And so it's a film. We showed it last night, the Mule Deer Foundation banquet, Friday night. We showed premiere, I guess you call it. It's going to be a 30-minute film, short film. It's going to have some hunts in it, and we're going to air it on the Outdoor Channel in September during Deer Week.
Oh, so, great.
Yeah,
great.
So,
Shawn, how can folks get involved in Wyoming? I mean, you're building chapters, you're doing stuff. I mean, tell us a little bit about what your plans are for the year.
Yeah, for the year, my plans are, this springtime we'll do a lot of banquets and other events like Gunapaloozas and Beers for Deer, just trying to raise funds. And then during the summer, we'll have youth events, getting people involved in hunting, trying to get youth involved because, R3 is big in the U.S., which is retention, recruitment, and reactivation. Trying to make sure we get more and more hunters back in the field because numbers have been dwindling even though our population has been growing in the U.S.
Right.
And we talked about the reason is we're still on a user pay model. When they're purchasing licenses and they're purchasing, ammo and firearms, that's going directly back to the management of that. Plus, if you're out there hunting, you're going to love that country. You're going to want it taken care of. So, get folks out.
Yeah, hunters are the greatest conservationists we have in the U.S. and in the world. So,
we
always want more hunters.
I don't know the statistic, but you guys might know. How much money is a Pittman Marauders get a year? Is it? I heard $40 billion, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's probably in the B, but it's understand how the distribution model is. Pittman Robertson is an excise tax that is collected on firearms, ammunition, and other stuff, and it varies between 9 and 11%. So it's collected by the retailer.
Yeah.
And that goes to the feds, and then the federal government redistributes that money based on license sales and a whole lot of other. There's a lot of formula there, and then that's redistributed back. So when we have folks purchasing more guns and ammunition, we get what we call the PR bump.
Yep.
And when that passes, we seem to get
less of a
bump. One of the things we have trouble doing sometimes is the required match. There's a match requirement to put that money into play, so you have to, and some states have had issues with not having match, non-federal match, so that they can't, and so you end up building a trust fund or a corpus. But it works really well. I'm not an expert on that, and there are people that way, but it's a lot of money. And actually, there's a bill working its way through Congress right now called the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, which uses that same model, the algorithm and the distribution model, but it's going to be money from, originally set up to be money from excise or oil and gas, but now it's going to be appropriated funds in that, because there was just think about the paradox there.
Right.
To get more money for wildlife, you got to allow more development out in wildlife habitat. I was screaming quite a bit.
Seems a little hypocritical.
Well, that's what the Land and Water Conservation Fund is. Back in the 70s, that was the deal that was cut, is if we're going to go to the Gulf of Mexico and some of these places, we're going to carve a big chunk of that piece of money back, and we're going to give it back to the states and to the feds to purchase lands, to do the mitigation, to do the replacement areas, to do all these things. Hey, as a national bill, our elected officials, it was, times have changed since then, but and it's never been fully funded. That's a $900 million a year, but it's an appropriated fund rather than a dedicated fund.
Oh, okay.
And I don't want to get into, political science and all that other stuff, but at the end of the day, elect, the House or the Senate, and then politics can basically say, we don't want to put the money in there, even though the law says you will.
Yeah.
They say, you know what, we got to do a budget bill too, so we're not going to do that. So, at the end of the day, I think the important thing is the PR in the user pay model works. For it to work, we have to have people out buying licenses and hunting, so that the excise taxes are collected. We're getting money through hunting licenses, and then they're matching it, and our state fish and game agencies can go out and do what they're paid to do.
Right.
They're highly trained, experienced folks that are out there looking out for wildlife for the people of the state that they work in.
Right.
And so, that's one of the things that bothers me as a wildlife professional, is when hunters start really putting down our red shirts in Wyoming.
Right.
You don't understand what it takes to do this job.
Those guys, I'm pointing at Shawn because he comes from that world, they are the most underpaid, overworked people in our state.
Yeah.
They are. And
tremendous respect for every one of them in every state.
They're all incredibly dedicated to the resource. They're actually doing it for the love of wildlife.
Yeah.
They're not doing it for the money. So,
we are in Wyoming. We're one of the few states that's self-funded. We don't take money out of the general budget for Wyoming.
And the other thing is they're giving up a lot of their hunting and fishing time.
Oh yeah,
to do that. So
absolutely, most of it.
One of the reasons I became a Fed is because I had some flexibility then to take some time off during bow season in Wyoming and go do these things. But it really is.
That's why Shawn started working for the Mule Deer Foundation.
Yeah, I actually get to hunt now.
Yeah, so we're running out of time here, but I want to come back how'd you do this year?
I did really well. I had the opportunity to kill a really nice deer in Colorado and nice deer in Wyoming, and actually I branched out and killed a real nice mule deer in Nebraska this year.
Where was that in Wyoming?
Nebraska.
It was the southern part of Wyoming.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. So the reason I asked that is I'm chasing some points, and I think we're going to use them this year. And
Are you?
And we've been trying to get G. We're a point behind. I can hunt H. I mean, H is a good unit.
So you're at 6. Yeah. So I think, in my opinion, H and G are awesome hunts. I think they're overpointed though.
Yeah.
For the hunt. I think
and they're going up every year.
Oh yeah, I think 3 points is that you can expect that hunt to be a 3 point, not a 7.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
I was like, if I could, one friend of mine drew 130 last year.
Oh, how did he do?
Well, he filmed it. He did really well.
That's awesome.
That's
a funky area because if you don't get the weather,
yeah,
it could be a ghost town out there.
Yeah. Well, I've gone down there and sat on the road and drank coffee and watched those big bucks walk on the bumper. You know, when you get that weather, and actually I was coming back. I was elk hunting. I got early weather. It was above the house. Was chasing these elk and, ended up screwing up on this really big bull in a timber and was getting back to the truck and it was snowing and I unloaded my gun at about 200 yards from the truck because it was about 10 minutes of light left and I walked back and I opened the truck door and something just makes me turn around and look and I turn over and there's about a 30-inch wide muley with points. The stuff you guys filmed.
Yeah.
Standing about 75 yards away. So here I'm trying to get reloaded, and it's standing there. And I pull up, and just as the crosshairs find the head, start swinging, and he just turns and walks away into the timber. And it was, that last 2 to 3 minutes of light. That's you lose light almost by the second, and he walked off. And so I come back the next morning. I never found him again. But that was probably one of the biggest bucks that I actually could have had an opportunity. And I just didn't. I thought the hunt was over.
Yeah.
I mean, it was almost like, when we're pheasant hunting and we get near the truck, we think the hunt's over.
Yeah, and then
but
all the
a lot
birds
of times
jump up.
all the birds jump up. So, we really appreciate your time. We appreciate everything that your family and you have done for Wyoming. We really look forward to this film you're putting out having an impact.
Yeah.
And getting folks understanding what we have to do to take care of these special places like Wyoming. And how to get involved, and hopefully it spurs at least one person to action, because that's all we can ever do is one person at a time.
And I don't want you to think that it's only Wyoming. We're starting in Wyoming because that's where it started, but this is going to be something that every state, like I said, every western state has migrating mule deer in it, and this is just a precursor to whatever state you hunt or live in. Get involved, because this is how we're going to help that resource.
Yeah, and it's a perfect match for us with our winter range migration and winter range initiative to be working with y'all on this. And I know that Miles has been talking to you guys, and the last thing I'll leave you on is make sure you take care of Shawn's better half over there, because we need him to be happy and productive. So
I've known Shawn's better half for the better half of 3 decades.
He's known my better half longer than I have.
That's true.
So Shawn, anything to leave us with? How can folks get involved this year with MDF in Wyoming?
Just check out our website and our Facebook, and if you don't have a chapter near you and you want to get involved, give me a call, email me, just get a hold of us, and we'll get you involved and make sure you can actually either get your feet on the ground or get.
So you're doing Gunapaloozas, Deers for Deers, banquets. We like to say, come for the fun, stay for the conservation.
Yep.
So.
Yep. It's a fun time. You'll spend some money, but the money goes to conservation. I mean, we know we'll have a good time, but also try to open your wallet if you can.
Yep.
Yeah. And last thing, and then we're signing off, is, our listeners should be looking for this almost $1 million we're going to be putting on the ground. We're going to be announcing when it's going out there and, documenting what's going on, because, we don't want folks saying, what are you guys doing? We want to show them what we're doing.
Yep.
So, and we're real proud of this grant and the opportunity to work with private landowners, Wyoming Game and Fish, and the federal agencies on it. So.
Yeah.
And we were honored to have your video premiere here at the Western Hunting Expo as well.
I'm glad. I'm happy that it worked out, and I thank you guys for doing that. It was awesome. It was a fun night.
So, Ike, Shawn, thank you. Until next time, I'm Steve Belinda, and thank you for talking mule deer.
Yeah.
Thanks for talking mule deer with Steve Belinda and Jody Stemler. The Mule Deer Foundation is the only conservation group in North America dedicated to restoring, improving, and protecting mule deer and black-tailed deer and their habitat. MDF is a strong voice for hunters in access, wildlife management, and conservation policy issues. To find out more, visit www.muledeer.org and stay tuned for the next episode of Talkin' Mule Deer.